Daf, Masechet Bava Batra, here with my sister-in-law, Abba Claudia, is Daf Chav Hey. So 25 in Masechet Bava Batra. Hopefully the others who are behind their cameras will know that we're starting. So continues the Mishnah. We've been talking in this whole parak. We started this a little more than a week ago. The Mishnah is talking about all the implications of something that a person does in their property that can move over and affect someone else's property, right? So this is the common theme, that what you do on your own property may affect somebody else. We're going to see actually tomorrow, I think, we probably won't do it today, that there's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, who says you don't have to worry about anybody else, right? Do whatever you want on your property. It doesn't matter if it damages somebody else. We're going to say tomorrow that's how we paskin, but don't get too excited yet. We did have, if you have, remember earlier in this week, the limitation even of Rabbi Yossi, where it's called a gira delay, right? Where it's like your arrows shooting out, but we'll get there. But continues our Mishnah. So the beginning of our Mishnah, Daf Chav Hey, you have to distance nivelot, which literally means dead bodies. So, you are dead animals, maybe carcasses, right? So if you're collecting, right, sorry, nivelot usually means dead carcasses, right? You're collecting animals, you have a slaughterhouse, maybe. You have to distance that. It's very smelly, it's very noisy. Veta kfarot, and cemeteries. Veta borski, and borski, which is a tannery, right? A borski is a place where you make leather, I guess, right? You soften things, and that's we've had this many times in Shas, right? It was the most smelly, unpleasant job that one could think of. And so it's interesting because from the context, this all makes it sound like they're all because of the smell, which is interesting. Why would kfarot be so smelly, right? So there are others who have other explanations for why the kfarot, it's depressing, it's you tameh, you don't realize, but the Mishnah makes it sound like these are all just nuisances. And you should be marchik min ha'ir, from a city, from a populated city, 50 amma. So these can't put right up to the next to the city. Of course, they had much smaller cities than we did, right? And you'd have to distance these from the city at least 50 amot. Continues the Mishnah, Ein osin borski el mizrach ha'ir. If you're going to make a tannery, you got to make it on the east side of the city, presumably because the wind won't blow in the smell into the city from the east. We'll see in the Gemara, today's whole daf is about where the winds blow. But Rabbi Akiva says, the chol ruach said, you can make it in any direction from the city, chutz mimarava, except for the west, so the opposite. Don't put it on the west of the city, umarchik 50 amma, and you have to make it 50 amot away from the city. And the Gemara is going to ask, of course, is that and or? But that's the first part of the Mishnah. The second part of the Mishnah is something that we had last Motzaei Shabbat, which is marchikin et mishra min hayerek. If you have mishra, remember, was the soaking that you did for the laundry before remember there were two containers, you would soak them, you would spin them. So you have to be marchik the mishra, the place that you soak the laundry, from yerek, from someone else's vegetables, because it'll give it a bad taste. And at krishim min habitzalim.
I thought the Misra was the pishtan. Here it says the pishtan.
Oh, so okay. So I stand corrected. The soaking pit, thank you. For the pishtan. I guess I got confused from the two cases. So you're soaking flax, again, but it makes the bad taste for the yerek. And krishim and abitzalim, the krishim, if you recall, we said last week, and we had this a little bit, were leeks, I guess, away from onions. And the problem was that the leeks actually take away some of the flavor, impart a bad flavor in the onions. And the chardal min advorim, if you have mustard seeds growing near a honey, whatever you call it, a hive, thank you, a beehive. And Rabbi Yossi says matir b'chardal. Rabbi Yossi says it's okay if you have chardal. We discussed this last week. We'll discuss it again at the end of today. Rabbi Yossi really permits everything, but he says according to the Chachamim, this case should be different. We'll see why later.
I'm sorry, just to tell you that the pishtan soaking is very smelly too. I've done some research on it.
Okay, there we go. So that's another smelly thing besides leather, besides all the other, besides pishtan really stinks. So continues the Gemara, Iboilu. Now the question is Rabbi Akiva, who said, right, the beginning of the Mishnah said, you can put your, you're not allowed, to put your tanner on the east of the city, like they do in Houston, as Charlie told us. And then Rabbi Akiva comes along and says, you can do it anywhere you want, except for the west, and it has to be 50 amos away. So ask the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva heichikama. What's Rabbi Akiva's change? Is he saying the chol ruach oseh? You can do it anywhere you want, v'somech, and you can put it right next to the city in any direction except for the west, chutz mi marava, where you have to be 50 amot away. The marchik are 50 amma. ve'oseh. Odilma, he's saying you can make it anywhere if you distance it, but you can never do it on the west, no matter how far away it is, because the wind will blow it. Odilma l'chol ruach ho'oseh u'marchik 50 amah. He was saying you could do a tannery in any direction if it's 50 amot away. Chutz mimarava, except for the west, the eno oseh klal. You can't do it at all. So what did Rabbi Akiva? What's the status of a tannery according to Rabbi Akiva? So Tashma, we can in fact resolve this from a Braita. The Tanya Rabbi Akiva Omer, l'chol ruach oseh. You can make a tannery in any direction, umarchik 50 amah, and distance it in those directions by 50 amot. Chutz mimarava, except for the west, the eno oseh kol ikar. You can't ever put a tannery on the west of the city, mipnei shehi tidira, because it is, now the word tadir usually means constant, right? It is constant. So ask the Gemara, what does that mean? Amalei Rava Rav Nachman, my tidira. What do you mean it's frequent or constant? Ilema tidira beruchot. Maybe you mean that the winds are constantly blowing from the west, right? So there's constantly or frequently a westernly wind. And if there's a westerly wind, it'll blow the smell and the debris, but really more the smell into the city. So you can't do it. The Ha'amar Rav Chanan bar Abba, Amarav, but Rav Chanan bar Abba said in the name of Rav that there are arba ruchot menashrot b'chol yom. You have 4 different winds that blow, winds meaning, episodes, I guess, of high wind that blow during the day. The ruach tzfonit im kulam. But the north, there's a northerly influence on all 4 of the winds, whichever direction they're coming from, the north always impacts it. She'ilmali kain, because if it wasn't the case that the northern wind was a part of it, ein olam nitkayem afilu sha'achat. The world couldn't live even 1 hour because the winds are going to be too strong. It's the northern wind that sort of modifies things. The ruach dromit kashem mikulam. And the southerly wind, and we think this is the question, that how could you say the westerly wind is the hardest? Here it implies that the southerly wind is the most powerful and destructive. Ruach dromit, I guess in the US, if you have hurricanes, that's true, but I'm not sure if it's true in the whole world, right? The ruach dromit, the southerly winds, are kashem mikulam. And says the bright, this is not a bright, right? This is Rav. Vilmale ben Nates shemamida. If you didn't have Ben Nates, now Ben Nates literally means the son of, a Nates is some bird, a vulture maybe? How do we translate Nates? Hawk, a hawk, right? If it wasn't for this spirit, Rashi says, Ben Nates, right? A malach, Rashi says, it's called a Ben Nates shemamida, that holds up the wind with its wings, mecharevet et olam. That wind, the southerly wind, would destroy the world. So there's something super powerful. Shenema, and it's based on this pasuk, as you have probably discovered by now. We love Sukkim from Eov in this Masechta. It's the only place you probably ever see them. You're going to see a lot of them. But as it says in Eov, where am I? Sorry. This pasuk is actually, it is. Hamibinatcha ya'avar netz yifrost kinafav the teman. Right, that you understand how the nates goes, how it protects you. It spreads out its wings to the south. So that's how we derive that the nates, the bird here, the wings of the bird, protect you from the southerly wind. So therefore, now why is this question on what you said? Is that implies that the strong wind comes from the south. And so if Rabbi Akiva was worried about winds, he should be worried about putting the tannery on the south. You know why Rabbi Akiva says don't put a tannery on the west? Elamai tidira b'shchina. Because that's where the Shekhinah lives. And since the Shekhinah lives in the west, since God is oriented towards the west, or the Shekhinah is oriented, you shouldn't put your tannery on the west, because everyone's going to be praying that direction, right? All the shuls are going to be facing west, and it would be not nice, first of all, to be facing towards the tannery, and also, I guess, not nice if the smell comes in the middle of tefillah, and that's what you're smelling. So,
is there something
so
we
just
know?
to be clear,
is there something we know that they don't?
There's a Gemara, everyone in the world knows, I think, not everyone, but most know in brachot that are of the opinion that we pray towards Jerusalem, right? It's a Mishnah. This Gemara does not agree with that, right? So that's not this is of the opinion. Now we'll see. There's different opinions here, but that's not the case. That you don't necessarily pray towards the Beit HaMikdash. If you pray towards the Shekhinah could be anywhere or somewhere. We'll see. The Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that the Shekhinah is in the west. Why?
Is there something we know they know about?
We should be grateful to Avotenu, which means the Tefillah, the Tanakh. Shehodia makom tefillah, because it taught us where to pray. Because the pasuk says Utzva hashamayim lecha mishtachavim. That the tzava we usually translate as like the celestial bodies, like the sun, right, the moon, are bowing down to you, God. Now, the sun comes up in the east, right? So we assume that before the sun comes up, it bows down to God. And so if it's coming up in the east, it bows down to God in the west. And so based on that, you can conclude that the Shekhinah is in the west. Tosfos, of course, points out the obvious problem, which is that the sun then sets in the west, so it seems like it's bowing towards the east. But, let's deal with one at a time. He's still vague about the answer. But this seems to be the proof and the reason why Rabbi Akiva said you have to either pray towards the west, which we didn't get to yet, but you can't build your tannery to the west, because that's where the Shekhinah is, because the sun and all the celestial bodies that we see coming from the east, because the earth is turning, but they saw them coming from the east, all are sort of bowing down towards the west. Ask the Gemara, maybe it's like someone, or people like back away from the kotel or from the aron, and they're bowing down in the same direction that they're in the opposite direction from which they're coming, right? So maybe the sun is gently backing its way towards our world and bowing down to the Shekhinah on the way, and you should go to the east. Kasha, we don't have an answer to that question, but that is Rabbi Akiva's opinion, that the Shekhinah is in the west. And therefore, if the Shekhinah is in the west, again, we didn't get to prayer exactly yet. We did just now, but Rabbi Akiva didn't mention it. You would always pray towards the west, no matter where you lived, regardless of where Israel was or Jerusalem was. Rabbi Oshaya Savar, and Rabbi Oshaya is of the opinion that Shekhinah b'chol makom, that the Shekhinah, the presence of God that we pray to, is everywhere. To Amar Rabbi Oshaya, why does it say in the pasuk, Atahu Hashem levadecha, you are Hashem alone, Ata sita tashmayim, right, Shmei Shemayim, right, you've made things unique, and the end of the pasuk, of course, as we all quote, is that Tzva Hashemayim lecha mishtachavim, right, that's what we quoted before. Says the Gemara, Shluchacha lo kishluchei basar v'dam. God's messengers, the messengers of Hashem, the angels, are not like the shluchim of basar v'dam. Because shluchei basar v'dam, if a king or anyone sends out a messenger, to get the message back, you have to return to the king, right? You have to return to where you started, right? Min makom shemishtalchim, from the place that they were sent off from, l'sham machzirim, they got shlichutam. They got to return their message, right? And say, I fulfilled it in that place. The Bach change out to the mem, right? Or the aleph, whoever that is, the haga, the gilion, takes out the mem. But the shluchim of God, they don't have to come back, right? Because they can go and do the shlichut and then report to God wherever they are, because God is not in a certain place. The Shekhinah is not somewhere you go back to. Shenemar, in fact, you can see that from the pasuk, which says again in Eov, "Hatishlach b'rakim vayelechu," right? They you send out brakim, right, like what thunder, and they'll go. Vayomru lecha hinenu yavo v'yomru, and they say hinenu, right? Yavo. They came. They did it. So it says that you send them out, and they said, and the messengers basically did their job, which is the message in Eov. I'm just trying to find the exact pasuk here. It ends at hinenu, right? So tishlach brakim vayelecha v'yomru lecha hinenu. You send them out and they go and they tell you we did our job, but it doesn't say, right? It doesn't say they went and they came back and said they did the job. Yavo v'yomru lo nemar el vayelechu. They go v'yomru and then they tell you. Malamin shashchina b'chol makom. So this is Rabbi Oshai's proof. I'm not sure exactly why he needed a proof about why that the Shekhinah is everywhere. So when God sends out a messenger, an angel or a messenger, whatever messenger it might be, the messenger does the shlichut and then tells God or reports back without going back to a place where they started. And therefore, the message is that in theory, you can daven anywhere, right? Because if you want to pray to the Shekhinah is everywhere, every direction, every place. The Af Rabbi Yishmael Savar Shekhinah b'chol makom. Rabbi Yishmael also held that way. The Tana de Rabbi Yishmael minayin shekhinah b'chol makom. How do you know? Very interesting proof. How do you know the Shekhinah is everywhere? Shenemar, because it says, remember, there's a story in Zechariah, right? In the beginning of Zechariah, where the Zechariah sees this nevuah, where God says to a messenger, go and measure Yerushalayim, right? Because I want to destroy it. There's a whole story about measuring the Medidah of Yerushalayim. And then God says, and in the Zechariah prays, and they send out a second messenger to cancel the first one, right? But when they send out the second messenger, now we quote in the pasuk, Hinei hamalach hadover bi yotzei, the malach was speaking to me left, umalach acher yotzei likrato. another messenger came to greet him, to talk to him. Now, it doesn't make any sense. If God sends out one messenger and then the second one to catch up, he would catch up to his back, not to greet him. It must be that they can come facing each other. So, acharav lo nemar, this is he came to his back, meaning he caught up to him, el likrato. The second messenger greeted the first messenger. Malamed shashchina b'chol makom. You see that messengers of God can go out from anywhere, implying that God could be, or Shekhinah could be anywhere. The Afr of Sheshet Savar Shekhinah B'chol Makom, also Rav Sheshet held Shekhinah B'chol Makom, and this actually gets to be very practical, because Rav Sheshet, if you recall, as Rashi reminds us, was blind, right? And Amalei Rav Sheshet L'Shameh, so Rav Sheshet had to stand up and daven, right? So the shamus asked, the assistant asked Rav Sheshet, which direction do you want to face? And his answer was, L'chol Ruchata Ukman. You can set me up, face me in any direction. I don't really care. I can daven any direction, because this is, again, the practical part of this, according to that opinion, which is not our prevailing opinion, of course, is that you can pray in any direction because the Shekhinah is everywhere. Said Rav Sheshet, except the Barbi Mizrach. I don't want you to face me to the east, right? So I stand me up, and again, Rav Sheshet was blind, so he had no idea which direction he was going in. So he said to his attendant, stand me up facing any direction except for east. And you're about to read exactly why. Lav mishum delet b'shchina. It's not because you can't face the east and still talk to God. I mean, the Shechina is in the east also. Ela mishum demoru bein mini. This is a bizarre Gemara, but the words are, because the minim, the heretics, had a halacha that you should pray to the east. Rashi here says the minim, and then on the right I have that there was a censor that took out the word, the Talmidim of Yesho, that the Christians used to pray to the east. Now, I don't know if that's true. I don't know that that's true at all. But, and then there's a debate about whether Rashi really meant that or not. The Rosh Hashanah says took it out. Anyway, some heretics, whatever they may be, made a rule that you have to pray to the east. And therefore, Sheshet said, I will never pray to the east. I'll pray in any direction. Shekhinah is everywhere, but never to the east. Does he have any explanation?
Steinsaltz? Yeah, it's on a stream. Lo hayam mitchila kivan kivun achid l'tfila. They didn't have one direction at the beginning. U'mitchila hayu bomim mivnim haponim lever Yerushalayim. So they used to build their churches facing Jerusalem, the ma'arav, or to the west. Gam lemizrach, and also to the east. Mistaber kikan medubar בכיתות מינים שהיו קשורות במידה מסוימת גם לפולחן השמש. Okay. So right. So obviously, right. So she just commented, I don't know who else, many Christian churches traditionally faced east. That's interesting, Charlie. Steinsaltz said something very similar. But the interesting thing is that Rav Sheshet lived in Bavel, right? So there, even if there were Christians, if they were facing to Israel, they would face to the west. So and there weren't Christians in Bavel
right,
at
that point. Yeah. So I'm not really sure. Rashi's time, I guess there were a lot of Christians, but anyway, but that was what Rav Sheshet said. So you can pray in any direction, but he didn't personally want to pray in the east because of the sun worshippers or whatever meaning. And Rabbi Avo, we're third to last narrow line. Rabbi Avo said Shechina b'ma'arav. Did I skip a little bit? No. Rabbi Avo was of the opinion that we sort of have, which is that the Shechina is in the west. Well, maybe not our opinion, right? The Shechina is specifically in the west, which is what we quoted from Rabbi Akiva before. Damar Rabbi Avo, my Uriah. What is the word Uriah? Rashi's a little bit puzzled about what Uriah means, but he says one explanation, which is bizarre also, is that in Persian, the word Uriah meant west. And the word which meant west, I'm not sure how much Persian Rashi was familiar with, but the word that means west in Persian is you can read it as Avirya. That's the air of God. So that somehow the Persian word for west is a sign that that's where the Shekhinah is. Very, very strange proof, I would say. But that was Rabbi Avo's proof. Anyways, continues the Gemara. While we're on the topic of the winds, we get a little bit distracted now by all the winds of the world. And Amar Rabbi Yehuda, the pasuk says, right, the very famous pasuk psukim that we read at the end of Devarim. It says, "Yarov kimatar likhi," right? You will, I don't know how to translate exactly, but you will move like the wind, like the rain, my Torah, right? It shall wash on you like the waters. Zu ruach maravit. That refers to the westerly wind. Shenemer mi arfo shel olam. It comes from the arpo shel olam. The western wind comes from the arpo. Rashi says arif can mean two different things. You mean the cheskato shel olam, the strength, Right? Orf means strength, so that's the strong wind is from the west. Again, not exactly sure, maybe because the Shekhinah is on the west, he says. And his explanation is that the Oref means the back, right? Which also means the back of your neck, right? Oref. So it means that the west is the back of the world because the sun rises from the east. And so the west is sort of the back, it faces the west. And that's why Orfo refers to the westerly wind, the Maravit. Tizal Kital Imrati. What does it mean when it says the Torah comes down like dew, my sayings? Zu ruach tzfonit, and it's called ruach tzfonit because it's mazelet et hazahav. It cheapens gold. We're going to have this in Amabet. Rashi explains here it means that the northerly wind is very damaging. It causes a lot of famine, a lot of destruction of crops. And so when things become destroyed, the price goes up, and so your gold becomes less valuable. You have inflation. So it's mazelet et hazahav. The Chenu Omer halazim zahav mikis, and the pasuk says zalim zahav mikis, that zav becomes too cheap for your wallet, meaning it's not that zav is cheap; it's that it's not worthwhile anymore. And then it continues and says kisirim alei desha. What is siirim alei desha? Zuruach mizrachit. That's referring to the easterly wind. Shemisaeret et kol olam kisair. It ruins, it blows up the whole world like Sa'ir, which was a very famous shade, right? A very famous spirit that was very bad. What's revivim alei esav? Zu druach dromit. That's referring to the southerly wind, which is the good one. Shehi ma'aleh revivim umegadelet asavim. It brings up the crops and makes the grass grow because the southerly wind is the one that's very beneficial for the world. Tanya. Now says the Gemara, the bottom line, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Olam laksadrahu domeh. Also very, very I think challenging Gemara to understand. But Rabbi Eliezer says that our world, if you think about it, now I'm just going to give you a little bit of context, and if others have deeper insight, I'm happy to hear it. The sun, of course, everyone has known for all history, rises in the east and sets in the west. But the sun, I think this is the way it is, and this is certainly the way the Gemara viewed it, sort of follows a pattern where it doesn't go straight above the middle of the sky, right? It probably depends on the season, of course. But they sort of viewed it as the sun starting in the east, going to the south, right? So southeast, going across the sky, going to the west, and then going to the northwest, basically. So it made almost like a sivuv, right? So it started east to west, but it went from the south to the north in that sivuv. And so says the Gemara in that context that the world, according to Rabbi Eliezer, is like an aksadra. An aksadra is an open portico, right? We've had this before. But in this sense, an aksadra is like a porch where you have three walls and one is open. And so according to Rabbi Eliezer, basically, the atmosphere that confines the earth is closed on three sides and open on one side. That's one understanding. And basically what happens is, ruach tzfonit eino misovevet. It's the northerly wind that is not contained, right? So that the rest of the winds are contained within this, but the northern side is opened. When the sun, which again travels from the easternly side down to the south and around, and it gets to the northwest, which is the last point of the day, when the sun gets to the Maravit Tzfonit, it has to disappear, of course. Says Rabbi Eliezer, it sort of flies up, gets out that opening, because you have an open side on the north. The sun goes over that side and it goes malam and arikia and goes back to starting point by the next morning, right? So that's how they sort of accounted for the sun escaping, because the world was confined only in three directions. And so the sun would get to the fourth open side, would get out the open side, come back in and start a new day. And Rabbi Yeshua's opinion was that in fact, no, the olam the kuvahu doma. The world is like a kuva, like a box, basically, right? It's Rashi says a kuva means a tent, but meaning like a closed, it's contained. There is no open side in the world. So how does the sun get from one side to the other? So what happens is ruach tzfana is misovevet, right? The ruach tzfana is contained, meaning unlike the first opinion that it's open and it's free, it's not free. But how does the sun get around? So kivan shechama magat lekeren maravit tzfonit, when the sun gets to the maravit, it's basically gets out of a window, right? That's they understood, that there was openings in this atmosphere where the sun would escape. There's not a complete opening, there's a window. The chozeret achrei hakippah, and it goes behind the kippah, which really mean the contained space, right, of the solar system or whatever their equivalent was. So that was their machloket. Again, why it's practical, I'm not really sure. Shenemar, but it's based to some extent on the following pasuk. The pasuk says that Holech el Darom, now we're quoting, right, from a beginning, way in the beginning of Kohelet. Most people are still paying attention on Sukkot when we read this part, right? Holech el Darom, you go to the south, again, which is, as I'm telling you, the sun goes from the east to the south. So Vev el Tzafon, right? It circles around to the north, and I'll read the whole pasuk if we want. Because I have it here, right? Holech al darom, sovev al tzafon, sovev holech haruach. The wind goes around. Ve'el sevivotav shal haruach. Right, and it comes back to its sevivotav, to its part. So says the Gemara, what does that mean? Where am I? Holech al darom biyom, that the sun goes and travels from the east to the west side on the southerly part of the sky during the day when we can see it. At night, when we don't see it, it's sovev el tzafon balayla. That's where it either escapes out the north or goes out the window and goes around the north at night. And when we say sovev holech haruach v'al sevivotav shav haruach, that's referring to Pnei Mizrach and Pnei Marav. It's referring to Rashi's Pnei here means the side, the northern side and the western side. The southern side, the eastern side and the western side. Shepa'amim misavavavtam upa'amim mahalachtam. Sometimes the sun goes across those areas and sometimes it doesn't. Meaning, basically, depending on how long the day is. Right? If the day is very long, then the sun is present all along the eastern, then southern, and then western sides. Again, it doesn't quite do that, but that's how they viewed it. If the day is short, then it doesn't. Then it skips some of that and starts, I guess, on the southeastern side and goes to the southwestern side and then escapes. So sometimes the sun goes there and sometimes the sun doesn't go there. So that's how you understand the pasuk. Hu haya omer. Now, he used to say, now, what does it mean, he used to say? So it says the Gemara, that means Atan Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer, the first opinion we had, that the world has an opening on one side, he used to say that, and he would darshan the following pasuk. This pasuk says, Min ha'cheder tavos sufa, that from the cheder will come, this is again from Eov, right, will come a sufa, cheder meaning the door, I guess, will come a sufa, meaning a storm, thank you. Zu ruach dromit. That's referring to a big southerly wind, which we already said before is the strong wind that has to be held back by the wings of that bird. And the pasuk continues, "Mimazarim kara." From mazarim comes the cold winds. That's referring to the northern winds, ruach tzfonit, right? That's referring to the north. Rashi understands also mazar means things that are spread out, right? They're not closed off, and that's Rabbi Eliezer's opinion that the north didn't have a wall, right? Basically, that the world is somewhat confined on three sides, but not on the northern side. And so the northern winds are much wilder. And then it continues, and it says, Minishmat el yitain kerach, right? There's literally the soul of God, you get cold. Zu ruach maravit, which we all have understood that the west is where God is, at least according to this opinion. That's where the Shekhinah is. The rachav mayim b'mutzak, and there'll be a lot of water in the mutzak. That's referring to ruach mizrachit. That's referring to the eastern side. I don't remember exactly why east is mutzak. Let's see if Rashi. I'm not sure. Let's keep going. We'll see. Maybe it's the last one that was left.
It's a torrent.
But when it says in the pasuk that Yerachav Mayim Mutzak, that's referring to the easternly wind. Ask the Gemara, is it true that the easternly wind, that's the question, right, is the one that brings the water, right? Va'amar Mar, we quoted on Amud Aleph that Ruach Dromit Ma'ale Revivim Megadelet Asavim, right? We said before that it's the southerly wind that actually ends up bringing all the things that grow plants and that nourish the grass. Lokasha, says Gemara, there's different kinds of rain that come with the wind. Hada'atya mitra b'nichuta, right? The southerly winds are the winds that come with gentleness, and they therefore help things grow, and they're very conducive to plants. Ha-b'shvichuta, the easterly winds are the ones that come out with tremendous fury and actually destroy things and are not very helpful. So the best winds and rain come from the south, the damaging ones come from the east. That is where we go. Says the Gemara now, continue. I don't know, you could stop me with any questions. Amar Rav Chista, why does it say mitzafon zahav ya'ata, right? That I will bring, or gold will come from the tzafon. Says the Gemara, which we had in Amud Aleph, zu ruach tzfonit shemazelet et hazahav. That's the ruach tzfonit, the northerly wind, which is bad, and it brings famine and dryness, shrav, and ruins the crops, and therefore money becomes cheaper, meaning it gets you less. You can buy less with your money. Right? Amar Rav from Bar Papa, the fourth to last narrow line. Amar Chisda, Miyom Shecharav Beit Hamikdash Lo Hugshama Ruach Dromit. This Ruach Dromit, which we said is the beautiful wind that brings nourishment and is gentle, since the Beit Hamikdash was destroyed, we have lost the gift of that southerly wind. Shenemar, because it says, Vayigzar al Yamin V'Ra'ev, V'Yochal al Smo V'Lo Saveo. This is Yeshayahu says, I'll decree against the Yamin, and you'll be famished, and the small, and you will not grow. And it says, Tzafon v'Yamin atabratam. It says by creation, it says by description of creation, north and Yamin. So obviously Yamin in that context is the opposite of north, right? North and south always go together. So you see from there that Yamin in this context, that we often translate Yamina, of course, as being east, but here Yamin means south. And so when it says by Yigzar al Yamin V'Ra'ev, it means I will decree against the southerly wind, and you will have famine. V'amar from Bar Papa and Chisda, the first wide line, Yom Shecharav Beit Hamikdash, from the day that Beit Hamikdash was destroyed, Eina Geshamim Yordim Me'otzer Tov. Rain which falls, obviously we can all see that it rains, but it doesn't come from God's Otzer Tov. I don't know exactly what Otzer Tov means, but I mean the words mean, good storehouse. But the rains come from an inferior source. They're not as nourishing. They're not whatever that might mean. Shenemar, because the pasuk says, "Yiftach Hashem lechat otzra tov," right? That this is the pasuk referring to when you do good things, God will open up the otzer hatov. Bisman she Yisrael. Bach takes out these words too. Osim ritzon makom. But the second part, Yisrael shuyim al admatam. When Bnei Yisrael are living on their land, then gishamim yordim mi otzer tov. So that there is I wouldn't say a curse, but a loss of blessing on the Jewish people, that if they're not living on their land, which I guess today is thankfully a different situation, but if they are not living on their land, then they don't get rain from the Otzer Tov. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, now that you learned all about the winds, I got a lesson for you. Well, then it's not about the winds, it's about where you daven. A person who wants to become smart, you want to be a chacham, then yadrim. You should face towards the south. This means in tefillah. So a person who wants to become a chacham should face towards the south when they pray. Although we said that the Shekhinah is everywhere, we're going to see in a second that there is a influence, I guess, of God on wisdom that comes from the south. The sheyashir, if you don't want to be smart, but you want to be rich, then you should dive into the yatzbin. You should face towards the north, okay? And how do you remember that? Simanech is that the shulchan b'tzafon, if you recall in the Beit HaMikdash, the shulchan, which had the bread, which is a symbol of nourishment and riches, was on the north of the what's called the Kodesh, right? Of the Ulam. And the menorah b'darom, the menorah, which symbolizes knowledge and enlightenment and light, was on the southern side. So if you want to be smart, daven towards the south. You want to be rich, daven towards the north. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, I think you could get both in one. Because the olam yadrin, you should always daven towards the south so you become smart. Because if you get smart, you'll become rich. Right? The way to get both is you try to get smart first, and then you'll become rich. Works fail-proof, right? Works for everyone. Shenemar, as it says, orech yamim bimina, right? Your long days on your right. Bismillah, osher v'chavod. You see that riches and respect, which I guess is referring to wisdom, come together. Says the Gemara, one second. How could Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi say that you should always daven towards the south so you become smart, so you become rich? Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Amar Shechina b'ma'arav. Yeshua ben Levi said on Amud Aleph, he was not of the opinion that you can daven in any direction. He was of the opinion that you can only daven towards the west. So how do you daven towards the south if you're davening to the west? This Gemara, of course you daven to the west. But the mitzaded atstude, you angle a little bit to the south, so you do southwest. So you're davening to the west to Hashem, but you also want to get rich, so you want to get smart, so you also go a little bit south. Amalei Rabbi Chanina the Rav Ashi. Rabbi Chanina said to Rav Ashi, well, what about if you live somewhere else? What about us? We live in the north of Eretz Yisrael. So obviously davening to the west for us is not going to be successful. Rabbi Shimon Levi said to daven to the west, but we live to the north. Now, it's a little bit bizarre what he means he lives to the north. He lived in Bavel, but could be he lived in northern Babylonia, so it was an area, in Bavel, which, of course, remember, in the Babylonians, they always referred to the west as Marava, right? B'nai Marava. They knew that Eretz Yisrael was to the west. But to us who live in the north, he said, again, it could be he lived in the north of Bavel or something else. What do? Anon yatvinu yatvitu b'tzvonu Eretz Yisrael adrimu adrumi. We should go to the south, meaning the southwest, right? Because we're facing towards Yerushalayim. Again, really strange. The Gemara asked this. How do you know that historically Bavel was in the north of Eretz Yisrael? As the pasuk says, "Mitzafon tipatach hara'ah hakol yeshvei haaretz." As the Navi says, referring to the Babylonian exile, that from the north the evil will come. So that's how you see that we view Bavel as being in the north. So long story from this Gemara, which is a little bit of an aside from Bava Batra, or maybe a big aside from Bava Batra, is that, I can't tell you exactly which wind is the best one, but there is a strong opinion in the Gemara that you can pray any direction because the Shekhinah is anywhere. But Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's opinion was that you should pray to the west because the Shekhinah is in the west, and presumably, again, this is not the same as the Gemara in Brachot, which said you should pray towards the Beit HaMikdash, right? So the question here is the Shekhinah in the west because Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi lived in Bavel, which he didn't, I don't think, and it was to the west or not, and so there's obviously many opinions about where to pray. So that is the end of our aside. Before we finish today's daf, let's do the last few lines of our Mishnah, which again is a repetition of what we had last week. We recorded this Mishnah last week. It said, Mishra, you should separate your soaking pit for your flax from your yerek. You should separate your krishim, your leeks, from your friends' onions. You should separate your mustard seeds, right, from the beehive, right? So then Rabbi Yossi said, no, you don't have to separate the mustard seed from the beehive. Tana Rabbi Yossi, matir b'chardal. And again, we explained last week, Rabbi Yossi himself holds all of it permitted. You can do whatever you want in your reshut. Doesn't matter. But he's saying that even according to you, the chachamim, that you usually can't, here the chardal and the bees are not clearly a situation, excuse me, are not clearly a situation where one goes against the other, right? Where the chardal damages the bees and the bees don't damage the chardal. Shiachol lomar lo, because the owner of the mustard seeds can say to the owner of the beehive, Ad she'ata omer li harchik chardalecha min dvorai, before you tell me to get my mustards away from your bees, harchik dvorcha min chardalai. I want you to get rid of your chardal, right? Your bees, sorry, for my chardal, because they are damaging me. They come and they eat the leaves of my chardalai, we said last week, and then remember the chachamim answered and said, it's not true, it's not what happens. Bees don't eat they don't want your leaves, they're not causing any trouble, and that's where we left it last week, that machlok. Charlie, what did you put? That. Okay. Another Charlie quoted that you could face your body towards Jerusalem and your face to the south or the north if you want to get rich or smart. Okay. Should we do a little more? Let's do a little more till the two dots. Okay. It says the Mishnah. We've quoted this before as well, that if you have a tree with big roots, you have to put it 25 amot away from someone else's pit where they dig a cistern, basically a bar is a cistern, to collect water, because otherwise the roots will go in and will ruin the cistern. Ubecharuv ubeshikma, with the charuv, which usually translated as carob, and shikma is what was translated for shikma? Some other big tree has a lot of roots. In those trees,
it's a sycamore.
Sycamore. Am I muted? No.
No.
Anyways, Rashi says these trees have big roots, but it doesn't tell me what tree they are. But if you have a charuv or a shikma, then 50 amot. Bein milamala, bein minatzad. Whether you are above it, meaning whether it's on a hill, and so it's, or above, we'll see, either one can be above, or min hatzad. Okay, I'm not sure that that's for me. Im habar kadma. Now, let's say the bar was there first, meaning the person had a bar, then you planted their tree, and then we'll see in the Gemara the cases tomorrow, but then the roots of the tree started causing problem. Then kotzetz, you have to cut down the tree because you didn't build it with permission. If notain damim, and you have to pay, we'll see in the Gemara that presumably the owner of the bar has to have you pay you for the value of the tree. We'll see, actually we'll see more details in a second. But if the tree was there first, and then the neighbor came and dug their cistern, and then 10 years later, the roots of the tree are now coming and causing problems. Lo yikotz, you don't have to cut it down because you built it with permission. I mean, you built it before the cistern. Safek zeh kodem, safek zeh kodem. If we don't remember who dug their thing first, then lo yikotz, then obviously from a safek, you can't force him to cut it down. Rabbi Yossi says, no. Afal pisha bar kodemet lilan. Even if the cistern was there and this guy came and planted his tree later, lo yikotz, you don't have to cut down the tree. And this is Rabbi Yossi's famous opinion. You dig in your property, I'm going to plant in my property. You don't have any claim on what happens in my property. Tana, now says the Gemara, Bein shabar lamata vilan lamala, bein shabar lamala vilan lamata. It says you can't build it if it's on a hill, right? If it's above it, which we took to mean it doesn't matter which one is above. I understand if the tree is above the bar, right, that the roots of the tree are going to go down and go into the bar. But if the bar is above the tree does not going to grow upwards, presumably. So why are you worried? Says the Gemara, Bishlama, bar lamata, vilan lamala. If the cistern is lower on the hill and the tree is higher, we're worried about that because ka'azlin shorashim misakile the bar. The tree's roots are going to go and damage the bar. El bar lamala vilan lamata amai. What's the problem if the tree is lower down than the bar? What damage is the tree going to cause in the bar? Amr Rav Chana Chaga Mishum Reb Yossi Mivnei Shemachlidina Takarka Umalkin Karkita Shalbar. The problem is not that the roots aren't necessarily going to go upwards. It's that the tree is going to grow under the bar, basically, and it's going to weaken the soil. And even though the trees often strengthen the soil, but in this case, we're worried it's going to weaken the soil, and by weakening the soil, it will cause the bar basically to collapse and to leak and not to sustain itself, and therefore you're not allowed to have your tree even lower than the bar within 25 amot. And we'll stop there, but we're going to pick up tomorrow the halacha of Rabbi Yossi and how we pass Rabbi Yossi and where Rabbi Yossi holds exceptions. So thank you, everyone. Sorry it was very late night. It's going to get earlier. It was a mistake that it was so late tonight, but hopefully next week will be earlier. And tomorrow morning at 7:45 a.m. American time. God willing. Thank you. Miriam. Thank you.
Shabbat tov.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.